All right, we are going to continue factoring today. We're going to learn 2 new techniques. So one of them is factoring by grouping. So we factor by grouping whenever we have 4 terms. We group them in pairs, so pairs of 2. We group the first 2, group the second 2. And we factor out the GCF until the parentheses match. So factor out the parentheses, group together the remaining terms. So in our example, we group the first 2, group the second 2. What is my greatest common factor in the first group? X squared. I can take out x squared from both of those terms. So I'm going to pull out an x squared. What am I left with when I divide out an x squared from just those 2 terms? X and minus 1. Because I'm dividing x squared, so I'm left with x. But x squared divided by x squared is 1. Do not forget the 1 there. It doesn't just go away. You need that 1 there. Looking at my second group, what is my greatest common factor between 2x and negative 2? 2. So I can divide out a 2. That 2 goes to the outside. What am I left with when I take out a 2? George? X minus 1. Perfect. In order to factor by grouping, you have to factor out whatever your GCF and make sure the parentheses are the same. Those 2 parentheses have to be the same. So those 2 parentheses come outside and they form 1 x minus 1. And then the 2 things on the outside form together and form the other parentheses as x squared plus 2. So the 2 things on the outside go together, and then because our parentheses were the same, that is just 1. So this would be our answer. All right, let's look at number 1 on the next page. So since we have 4 terms, we're going to factor by grouping. So we group the first 2 and group the second 2. What is my greatest common factor in the first group? So I can take out a 2. They're both divisible by 2. Perfect. And how many x's? X squared. So 2x squared is going to go on the outside. Now when we take out a 2x squared, 8 divided by 2 would be 4. And if I have 5 x's and take 2 away, how many am I left with? 3. So 4x cubed. And then minus 6 divided by 2 would be 3. And if I have 2 x's and take 2 away, do I have any more x's left? Nope. So that's the first group. Now let's look at our second group. We're going to take out the greatest common factor here. So George, what do I have in common between 12 and 9? 3. So I can divide out a 3. Do I have any x's in common here? No. So I'm just taking out a 3. So plus 3 goes on the outside. What is 12 divided by 3? 4. So I have 4x cubed. And what's 9 divided by 3? Negative 3. So are my parentheses exactly the same? What's inside the parentheses? Yes. You have to have your parentheses be exactly the same when you do this. So those come together and form 1 parentheses here. So this would be 4x cubed minus 3 in our first parentheses. And then what's going to go in the second parentheses? 2x squared plus 3. Awesome. The 2 things on the outside go into your other parentheses. So this would be our answer. So again, when you have 4 terms, we factor by grouping. So group the first 2, group the second 2. What's my greatest common factor in the first group? x squared. So I'm going to take out an x squared. So I'm dividing both of these by x squared. Yes, Bella?
How come it's not x? I don't get that.
Because you take out what they have in common, so they both have two x's in common that I can take away.
But in the last one,
All right, what am I left with when I take out x squared? X plus 1. Awesome. Now looking at my second grouping here, what is my greatest common factor? -5. So I want to take out a -5 here. What am I left with when I divide out a -5? X plus 1, because -5 divided by -5 is 1. Do not forget about the 1. So are my parentheses exactly the same? Yep, so they're going to go together on the outside. So x plus 1 goes outside. And then the two things that were already on the outside go together in our second set. So that would be x squared minus 5. That's our answer. All right, let's look at the next one. So we have 4 terms, so I'm going to factor by grouping. Group the first two, group the second two. What is my greatest common factor in the first group? X squared. So I'm going to take out an x squared. Put that on the outside. What am I left with when I divide out an x squared? X plus 5. Perfect. Now in my second group, what's my greatest common factor? -5. So -5 comes to the outside. What am I left with when I divide out a -5? X plus 5. Are my parentheses exactly the same? Yep. So they're going to form together to be just 1, x plus 5. And then what's my other parentheses going to be? X squared minus 5. All right, let's take a look at the next one. We have 4 terms, so group the first two, group the second two. What is my greatest common factor in the first group? X squared. So I'm going to take out an x squared. What am I left with when I divide out an x squared? 3x plus 1. Perfect. So be careful. We have x squared, and we're taking out an x squared, but this turns into 1. So don't forget the 1 there. Now in my second group, what's my greatest common factor? -5. So we're going to take out a -5. What am I left with when I divide out a -5? 3x plus 1. Are my parentheses exactly the same? Yes. So that's going to come together to form 3x plus 1. Now what's going to go in my second parentheses? X squared minus 5. Perfect. All right, the next page we're going to skip. So we're skipping the next 2. Next, we're going to look at perfect square trinomials. So this is a new way to factor. So today we're looking at 2 different ways: factoring by grouping and perfect square trinomials. So perfect square trinomials, when we have 3 terms, we factor a little bit differently than when we had perfect square binomials. When we have perfect square trinomials, it's going to end up in 1 parentheses squared. So our first term is a perfect square, and our last term is a perfect square. So what are 2 factors of x that give us x squared? X and x. What are 2 factors of 25? 5 and 5. So in my parentheses, I'm going to have x. Whatever the sign in the middle is, that's going to be what goes in the middle. So it'll be x plus 5 squared. Don't forget the squared up top. So just like we talked about the last couple days, to check our work, we can FOIL. So check by foiling. If you wanted to double check your answer, you could FOIL it out. All right, let's look at the next one. So x squared is a perfect square and 36 is a perfect square. So what times what gives us x squared? X times x. And what times what gives us 36? 6 and 6. So what's going to go into my parentheses squared? X plus 6, because in the middle here, my sign in the middle is a plus, so that's going to be what goes in the middle there. All right, let's look at the next one. X squared is a perfect square, and 49 is a perfect square. So what times what gives us x squared? And what times what gives us 49? So what's going to go into my parentheses squared? X minus 7, because we have a minus in the middle here, so minus goes in the middle there. All right, so x squared is a perfect square. We have x and x. What two factors give us 100? 10 and 10. So what's going to be my answer? X minus 10. Just x minus 10?
Squared.
X minus 10 squared.